Welcome back to the Let's Buy a Home podcast. This week, I'm joined by financial broadcaster Georgie Frost. Georgie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Please do start by introducing yourself.
I'm Georgie Frost, financial broadcaster,
Okay.
journalist and editor. I host This Is Money podcast. I spent 6 years at the Times. I have just launched a new podcast called Investing Unlocked. And before that, I used to be a sports reporter in a place where you know very well. I used to be a Sunderland reporter as well. So there you go. There's a little potted history of me.
That's what we like to hear. Welcome to the podcast. An honorary Mackem, we could say.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I'm a Derby
Not
County
quite.
season ticket holder, but
Not
I
quite.
would support them in a Derby game.
Perfect, that will do me. Okay, so we start every podcast episode with the same question. The Let's Buy a Home Hall of Fame is a place where each of our guests placed an item that they could not live without. That could be furniture, decor, a tool, a toy, or a gadget. What would you like to place into the Hall of Fame?
Kitchen towel.
Expand.
Yeah. So versatile. So versatile. I mean, so I'm someone, which is probably not ideal for a Let's Buy a Home podcast, that spent many years renting and moving. I don't think I've ever spent longer than a year and a half in one place since I went to university. Kitchen towel's brilliant. One, I mean, it's great for cleaning, obviously. I mean, it's not great for the environment, but, it's brilliant for packing. You can even write notes on it. And when the pandemic struck and I was in Germany and I came back and everyone had taken all the toilet roll. Good for emergencies. I wouldn't put it down the toilet, but it just made me feel more, comfortable that I couldn't buy toilet paper in the shop. So at least I had something, so it's so versatile.
Good answer. And the first time I've had that one.
Oh, well, there you go.
I appreciate it. Brilliant. Okay, let's get into the meat of things then. How did you get started in financial journalism?
I'll give you the abridged version because it's quite a long one. As I said before, so I was a sports reporter. I was working in the North East and then I went to the BBC and then worked all around. And then, unfortunately, I had a back injury. And I actually woke up 2 days before Christmas in the North East, actually, and I couldn't walk. And I tried to carry on, and eventually they said, look, if you don't stop driving around, you'll end up in a wheelchair by the time you're 40. And as a sports reporter, I want to go to the games. I don't want to be stuck in a studio. So I was like, right, fine. When I finally admitted that I was going to go down south and get a proper job in PR, I couldn't sell beer to an alcoholic. I'm so bad at it. But that was my view, that I'm going to work in PR. And then I was working in Manchester at the time. And so I went down south and I saw this job advert that was like, what I remember it saying is, does anyone know anything about radio? Like, I mean, obviously it was probably more detailed than that. And I was like, ooh, well, I do. And that'll be great while I wait to get my proper job in PR. Because that's what journalists do, work in PR. And obviously I didn't get the job in PR, but I did get this job. And it turned out that it was for a financial radio station. And I don't know if it was just nobody else had applied, but they were like, we've got the slot free on investing, actually. Originally, thank God I didn't do that. But they said, actually, no, there's a 4-hour slot every day talking about personal finance and consumer affairs. And I just discussed it with my friends who laughed in my face because, of course, I had that back injury and sports journalism isn't well paid anyway. So my own finances were pretty rubbish. I mean, I wasn't stupid. And I think most people in the country aren't. They're just disengaged. Finances were boring, etc. So I don't know why I said yes. I did. A bit of chutzpah, a bit of desperation. And November 2014, I went live. And I remember interviewing someone about pensions and thinking, oh my God, I've got 30 minutes to fill. And I was like, so pensions, how'd you get into pensions? I think about it now, but anyway, so within 18 months, though, I was named the UK's Financial Broadcaster of the Year. And it's not because I had this sort of Damascene moment where all financial knowledge just came into my brain. I think it was for the fact that, as I said, I wasn't stupid. I was always talking at a level in which my audience was too. I went on a journey with them, and even to this day, how many years later, I still have no problem in saying to people, what do you mean by that? I don't care if people think I'm stupid, because the vast majority of people listening, or a lot of people listening, probably won't know that either. So who I was is completely sort of affected this type of broadcaster that I am today. And I hope I never forget that person who was that sort of in debt, struggling. I mean, I've brushed over it. I said this would be brief, sorry, but I brushed over it. But I tell you what, being in debt and not knowing you're going to work and having a major disability is really frightening. And so I don't want to diminish that period of my life. It was frightening. And as much as I kind of want to forget about it, I don't want to forget about it, because there are plenty of people in this country who are in that position. And when you're in that position, no matter how much, how intelligent you are, or it is really hard to think about all the things you need to with finance. So I hope in some way I make learning about money or understanding money a little bit more entertaining and a little bit easier.
Was there a single moment where you realised in those early days the importance of financial education?
I don't think there's a single moment. I think it's every moment where I stop to think about the person that I was. And I'm still learning. I'll be learning for the rest of my career that I stay in finance, because every little area that I cover, and bearing in mind, I now do investing, not just as an investor, but, as a podcast host, every little area of finance, and this is a great example, you're an expert in property. You know far more than I'll ever know, because this is the area of finance that you are expert in, and I can only dream to know as much. But then what would I give up by spending all my time learning about property? So, I'm jack of all trades, master of none, I think.
I think it's quite interesting when you said about keeping the information jargon free and sort of low level, so to speak. That's something I try to do, not only with my mortgage content online, but also with the podcast. I don't think you're impressing anybody if somebody's online and, it's all jargon and it's long words and big sentences. People want to be able to relate to the information and just understand, what is a lifetime ISA? How do we do these relatively simple things, but what are they? How's that going to help me achieve X, Y, and Z?
But even if you know what these terms are, and I know what these terms are, lots of people will know what these terms are. I've been doing podcasts since 2007, and I listen to podcasts all the time. I know I'm a veteran, but I was just thinking, were you even born then? No, of course you were. So I've been doing podcasts for a long time, and I appreciate when you are listening, or now when you're watching podcasts, the beauty of listening to a podcast specifically is you tend to be doing something else at the same time. So it doesn't hurt just to stop, pause. What does that term mean? Can you just remind us? Because people are not 100% engaged in listening. I mean, they could be sat there, really focused on every single word, but it's unlikely. And that's the joy of a podcast, that you can carry on cooking, or you can go running, as I do, whatever. Not often, but occasionally. So that's why I think it's really important, even if you do know the terminology, to take a step back and be like, actually, let's just make it a simple, entertaining listen to people. Would I talk about this with my mates? No, I wouldn't. So why would I do it on a podcast?
Yeah, we were just talking before we started recording, and I was explaining that a lot of my home buyers actually reach me through the medium of podcasting, which is quite a new thing, but it might be interesting to somebody else that people actually choose to find their experts or get their education from podcasts. And you've mentioned that you've been podcasting for almost 20 years now. But also, podcasts have been quite popular and approaching mainstream for probably 10 years now. It's not necessarily a new thing for a lot of people. Have you noticed a change in the role of the podcast in terms of people seeking education or news through them?
God, yeah, absolutely. I still can't believe when I think about 2007. I mean, this was in your bedroom, in your pants kind of stuff. The idea that this would be something that you could actually make a career out of is extraordinary. But here we are. And I mean, yeah, look, every man and his dog is creating a podcast at the moment. There's something for everyone. I mean, are we going to reach some sort of saturation point? Probably. And what I do feel a bit sad about is that, and I know I do corporate podcasts as well, but I do feel a bit sad that we're missing some of those, in your pants, in your bedroom rawness of a podcast, because it's now all very slick. And some ways that's absolutely great. And there's something for everybody. And I think that is brilliant. It's not just me that says this. The statistics from Ofcom looking at the way people are listening to podcasts now shows that more and more people are getting their news content and those sorts of things from podcasts. So, the evidence is there. And because you can now have, God, I think about the idea of being filmed. Oh, wow. I was from an era where I was presenting a radio show in my slippers. Now everything is filmed, which is awful because then you have to like make an effort, and I'm not very good at that. But yeah, it can be used as social content, so it's such a great way to sort of engage people in education and all that sort of thing. So I'm a huge fan. Obviously, I'm very pro podcast. It's where I get most of my knowledge about things now, but I kind of always have.
I find, for me personally, I do a lot of financial podcasts as a guest, and obviously this home buying podcast. Predominantly, most of my listeners are London based. A lot of people who come to me after I've appeared on other podcasts are also London based, and that's probably linked to the fact that London is the place in the country where it's hardest to buy a property. So I think people who are in need of help, in need of information, yeah, they are definitely turning to podcasting now, which is hopefully exciting.
Isn't that interesting, that London bias? I'm so conscious as a broadcaster that, yeah, look, as a financial broadcaster, there are a lot of stories, particularly about property. We did one last week on This Is Money podcast. That are London based because London is such a kind of bubble. I don't mean that as a boom and bust bubble necessarily, but it's like an island on its own when you compare it to the rest of the UK. But I'm so conscious, given my accent, which is very, very southern, even though I was born in Norway, which is more northern than you, and I've lived all over the country more than I have down south, I'm still really conscious to make it not exclusive. So I hate the idea of this sort of London-centric news. I'm loving the fact that, is it Channel 4 now in Leeds, BBC in Manchester? I think it's great.
The TikTok comment I get more than any other comment is nobody can buy a home these days. And I think you sometimes have to remind people that not everybody lives in London.
Yeah.
People are buying homes in the northeast, Manchester, Liverpool, Scotland, whatever it might be. The landscape isn't exactly the same everywhere else as it is in London, and there are different home buying opportunities when you move around the country and seek different types of properties. Yeah, it's not all about London.
It's not all about London, but I was living during the pandemic in Yorkshire, in lovely Skipton actually, and when I moved, I know I was on the Facebook site for Skipton, and when I moved down south for work, I moved to Surrey. I just remember reading the Facebook site saying, one bedroom properties for 200 and something. We're getting London prices now. And I think you'd be naive. Don't get me wrong, I don't think you're going to get to London prices, but we are seeing property prices go up more than certainly we are in London. I mean, we were talking, is London about to have a bit of a crash? I mean, I'm not suggesting that's the case. You're the expert on this, not me. But, certainly around the country, people are seeing property prices go up beyond what they're used to. And so that must feel to people, they still have the same argument. My dad could have bought something 10 years ago and now I can't stay in the same village. It's those sorts of questions, those sorts of issues are still going to be as real to people around the country, even if prices aren't as high as London.
Yeah. You've mentioned that you've been working as a financial broadcaster for just over 10 years now. You've got all of your financial podcasting work that you do. Some may assume that you would have it all figured out. So, have you always had it all figured out?
Well, we know I haven't always had it figured out. I was really, really disengaged with money, obviously, up until the time I became a financial broadcaster. And I always say, what's my best financial tip? Become a financial journalist, because you are going to learn a heck of a lot. But even then, you still make mistakes. And sometimes I feel like the system is rigged against us at times, that for the best intentions in the world, you can still be caught out. In terms of the mistakes I make now are very different to the ones that I made in the past. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that you make when you're in your 40s as opposed to when you're in your 20s, maybe, and you're perhaps earning a bit more, is lifestyle creep. So obviously the more you earn, the better the quality of things that you buy. Bit of keeping up with the Joneses comes in here, and perhaps in my 20s when I was heavily in debt, I had to watch the pennies more. And now when it's not quite as essential, then I don't. And so I'm probably wasting more money than I ever have in my life. And probably shouldn't say that as a financial journalist, but I'm really reluctant to say wasting as well. I mean, look, there will be wasting money, right? But I think financial journalists particularly, and rightly so, look, people want to know ways in which they can save money, etc. But actually, I'm really keen to say, make sure that you enjoy your money too, because you work really hard for it. And so if you, and this is really pertinent if you're trying to save to buy a home, if you know, drink water, eat bread, and wear a hair shirt and self-flagellate all the time and never try and spend any penny, you will fail and your life will be miserable. Let's not have a miserable life. Cut back on areas which don't give you value. So really explore what it is that, gives you value. And if it doesn't, obviously get rid of it. And if it does, find somewhere else to cut back so that at least your journey to whatever it is you're saving for, whether that's buying a house or retirement, is a good one.
Yeah, I think the narrative around being good with money, or what being good with money actually looks like, is changing, and it's maybe becoming more complex because of social media content. There's so much information out there about building property portfolios and cryptocurrency and investing and being financial freedom and all of these things. I'll often hear people say, "Oh, I'm not very good with money." But then I'll review the credit reports. I'll see the bank statements. They've got a house deposit there.
Yeah.
They haven't got any bad credit. And things look, to me, that, looking at the average person, that seems fine. Reality is that we're not all going to be sort of perfect. We don't live in this world where we're all going to sacrifice. Exactly.
But this is the thing, like, I should say this was, what is perfect? Perfect to me doesn't look like someone that holds their money so tightly that they can't spend on anything and focuses, I'm going to get a house. Life is a journey that you need to enjoy as you go along, because the problem that we see, particularly with retirement, is not that people spend too much and they're left with nothing at the end of the day, is they're not spending enough. Because if you're spending all of this time saving, how do you flip it around and get into the mindset where you can actually enjoy it? So I am a big proponent of, you work hard for your money, make sure that you get value from that money, and then cut back where you can, and then invest and do the right things. I think we're living in a world as well. Social media is brilliant in some ways. It's absolutely horrendous in others. But in education, the clips that you put out are really educational, really useful, really inspirational to people. But there are other sort of financial influencers, and I've got to be in my bonnet about this one at the moment. There's plenty that are telling you how much they earn as social media influencers every month. 50,000 a month. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? Who are you inspiring apart from showing off?
But then the caption might state, just to be transparent.
Yeah, it's like, but you'll take probably sponsorship money. Yeah, exactly. Sponsorship money from, I don't know, some match betting kind of thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Not all of them do. And some of them are fine. And look, if that's inspirational to you, fantastic. But the reality is, the vast majority of people will not be earning £50,000 a month. You might be earning that year, and that's great. So this idea that everybody else has got it sorted, everybody else is better with money than you are, because we are surrounding ourselves with people who are experts, that do know a lot. And you're thinking, I don't know anything about money. Well, yeah, look, me compared to you about property, I know nothing. Me compared to a couple of my mates who've got no idea about property, they'll say the same about me. Stop comparing yourself to others. If there's someone that inspires you and you can learn from them, learn from it. But, as much as you can, do it in your own way. But it's really hard when you're surrounded by people who seem to have it all sorted.
Actually, I was speaking to a home buying client the other day, and they were telling me they had a couple of mispayments on some agreements in the past a few years ago. And they'd built this up so much in their head after reading information online using ChatGPT. And the way they described it was, they said it's like when you become ill, and then you start trying to diagnose yourself via Google, and before you know it, you're terminal.
Yeah.
And they came to me, and in their head, it was the absolute worst possible outcome.
Yep.
They could never buy a home. And then I actually reviewed everything, and they were fine. It was okay.
Yeah. This ChatGPT thing, I'm wondering what you think of it, because I got ChatGPT to look at my investments, and it recommended me selling things. And then when I showed it again, it recommended me buying these things. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, what? But I reckon a lot of people, and I was doing that as an experiment, but I reckon a lot of people are going to be using ChatGPT as their kind of broker, as their kind of financial advisor. Does that concern you?
A quick pause. If you're a first-time buyer, you don't need to figure this all out on your own. I'm Dan Knott, also known as Dan Does Mortgages, and I work with first-time buyers around the UK, helping them to achieve mortgage success and to take their first steps onto the ladder. If you want to know what you can borrow, what deposit size you need, and what your monthly payments are going to look like, let's have a chat. Book your free mortgage appointment right now via the link in the show notes. Back to the episode. Yes, but people do that in different forms anyway. For example, on Facebook, there'll be first-time buyer Facebook pages, and I'll see hundreds of people posting on these pages every day. I found a house, what do I do next? 90% of the responses are wrong.
Wow.
Every time, because people aren't mortgage advisors, people aren't solicitors, people aren't estate agents, whatever it might be. So people are getting incorrect information anyway.
That's true.
Which isn't ideal.
That is true.
But ChatGPT, the problem with that is it's often very generalized. It's not specific to the individual. It's not specific to the market at the moment. All these criteria points for home buying. So no, it's never going to be able to give you the final answer. And it's never going to be able to give you the human touch that actually speaking to somebody who you like, who you trust, who you can relate to, you know what that will give you.
Yeah.
So I think that's the major difference there.
All right, then. So ChatGPT is not going to take all of our jobs. Hurrah!
In the bin. But yeah, talking about being in maybe an imperfect situation, do you think we can start working towards our big happy goal, whatever that may be? Buying a home, going travelling. Do you think we can start working towards that whilst we're in an imperfect situation, such as having debt, a few missed payments, whatever it might be?
Yes. Now, as financial journalists, and advisors and anyone in finance, I reckon, you're always reluctant to say something like this because, yes, firstly, I will caveat this by saying not all debt is bad, as we know. You know, buying a home, good debt, right? But badly managed debt is bad, first and foremost. So if you have very expensive debt, you know, it is advisable, obviously, to focus on paying for that. However, we then say, get yourself 3 to 6 months of savings, which some people look at that figure and think, you know, I'm never going to have that. 3 to 6 months of essential outgoings is what they recommend. So get rid of your debt, then you get your savings pot, and then you start looking at things like investing. And that's your emergency saving pot. So then you're probably saving for like a house, which is a short-term thing. So you probably want that in cash, and then you start thinking about investment. Right. And all of these are very sensible things to do in that order. However, life is imperfect. As I said to you before, what is perfect? We're all in an imperfect, probably, situation in some regard. But where I think actually saving for a goal is not just it's actually for me quite advisable, because I did say I started investing before I had that 3-6 month saving pot, because what it does is it gives you motivation. And I think that is so important when it comes to finance. It gives you engagement and it gives you motivation. If all you're doing is paying down past debt, giving money to banks in interest and all that sort of thing, it feels rubbish. You need to start paying yourself and paying for your future and getting engaged. And if you can have that hope, you can see, and that's why we always recommend having a financial goal. When you go to that restaurant or when you go to the coffee shop, you might decide, you know, actually, I don't need this. What I want to do instead is I want to focus on that goal instead. I'm going to put a little bit of money in here, a little bit of money there. So that for me, I just think it's a motivational tool, and that is just fabulous.
Yeah, we're going to talk about renting now. So the name of this podcast is Let's Buy a Home, and I am a mortgage advisor.
Yep.
But believe it or not, I don't think everybody should buy a home all of the time.
Yep.
There's absolutely a place for renting for the right people at the right time. So what role has renting played in your life?
Renting is absolutely massive for me. I'm a bit of a dyed-in-the-wool renter. So since I left for university at sort of 18, 19, I have obviously rented everywhere I've gone. Now, I hear a lot about people say, oh, you know, it's dead money. You're throwing money away. You're basically paying the mortgage of your landlord, etc. Which, you know, possibly is true. But then I think about the trajectory of my life and the things that renting has done for me. And let me make no bones about this. the rental situation in the country is not ideal. It could absolutely do with improvement. I'm not sure the new government policy, the Renter Act, will answer those questions, but it might go some way to doing so. So, I'm not Pollyanna-ish about the rental situation, but for me, I think about, well, how has it benefited me? I've spent a lot of the time out of the country traveling. The pandemic changed everything for me. I could, work from wherever. So I spent months in Spain. I've been living out in Toronto at the moment. So it's just made it easier for me just to kind of go out or go away. I've had to escape bad relationships. And the idea, now I do own my own home, of going through trying to sell the property, waiting what could be months, because the people who we bought the house from, my house now, basically put the property up for sale in 2022 when they broke up, and then they couldn't sell it for about 2 years. I don't know what they were doing, but by the sounds of it, it wasn't pretty. And I think that, to me, is just the horror situation. But it's also, that's the bad side of it. But the good side is I've been able to move around the country. I've worked in Sunderland, right? I've worked all over the northeast. I've worked in the northwest. I lived in Skipton and other places in Yorkshire, Bristol, Brighton. I've worked all over the country, and I've been able to move around. And the reality was, I've been able to live in better places than I could have afforded to buy. And I didn't know where I wanted to stay. I feel it's quite sad when I hear young people now. I was talking to a colleague of mine, who's 26 and saying, I'm going to have some money from my parents to buy a house. Otherwise, I never think I'm going to get on the property ladder. And I was thinking, and I had someone else saying, yeah, I'm going to have to move in with my partner. Not going to have to, but I'm moving in with my partner in their 20s. I'm like, red flags. Why are you, if you are in a situation where you are not quite sure about your partner, or you're very early days and you feel like the only way you can buy is by, moving in with a partner, whoa, take a step back. Take a step back. I didn't buy until I was in my 40s. When I think about the amount of money that, again, it goes back to wasting money. Hundreds of thousands of probably I've spent in renting. Do I think it's wasted money? No, not at all. I was never forced to live with someone I didn't want to live with. Like, I didn't take any money from my parents. Look, if your parents are willing to give you money, fantastic. Just what I'd say to parents is make sure that you are not sacrificing your own future for that. But still, and also I'd say protect yourself as well. If you're going to be in a relationship with someone and your parents give you an inheritance, or they give you some money, etc., declaration of trust and all that sort of jazz. I'm sure you can go into that in more detail. However, I just think, don't feel pressured. You don't know where you want to work, where you want to live, who you want to live with. Explore your life, travel, enjoy it. It's probably the worst advice to give on a buying a home, podcast, but buying a property should be something. I was so proud of myself for having saved that deposit. It was on my terms. I bought a house when I was ready and when I wanted to. If you feel in any regard that you're under pressure, or that it will, tie you to one person or one place, don't do it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you've mentioned about relationships there. So sometimes my home buyers might take a 5-year fixed mortgage product, and then 2 years later, I'll get a telephone call. Dan, we need to speak. We need to get out of the mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
That's never because of fluctuations in the market. That's never because of the property. It's 99% of the time because they're breaking up.
Yeah.
And that's something I have speak to my home buyers about. If we think about taking a 5-year fix, do you understand? If you do break up, you're tied in there, early repayment charges. And yeah, it's absolutely a consideration.
Protect yourself.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, protect yourself. A friend of mine is in the worst situation at the moment, where basically her other half has decided he doesn't want to be with her. And because she put in all of the deposit, she put in some inheritance money. He didn't put anything in, although he does have a better job, so he was paying, some of the mortgage. Because they're both signed the property details, he has right to half the house, even though they've got a couple of kids. So she's in a position now where she's got no protection. I just think, I know it's awful when you go, I'm such a cynic here, but I know it's awful to think that a relationship will fail. But you know what? It might.
Yeah.
And it doesn't hurt just to have a real conversation. And you know what? If you cannot have that conversation with a person, what will happen if we break up? So I'm in the process of moving to Canada. I've had a very real conversation with my fiance of what happens if we break up. Because, I've shipped expensively. All my stuff is coming in Canada at the moment. What will happen? So we've sort of agreed that we have this kind of contract that, he will pay for me to... It sounds really unromantic, doesn't it? But the reality is we respect each other that much and love each other that much that conversation to us is not a problem. I mean, he's from the Northeast, so maybe they're quite good up there for talking about money and having a real conversation. But that would be my tip for anyone. Communication. And if you cannot have those hard conversations, really think, is that person for me?
Yeah, and for any of our listeners who can relate to that or who are buying a home with a partner, what we're talking about here is how you structure the ownership of the property. Yep. So 2 choices generally, joint tenants or tenancy in common. Have that conversation with your solicitor as well. They will arrange that, and you can just make sure if anything goes wrong, you're not going to be left short. So
absolutely. Yes. I don't think it's that expensive. I think we paid about 300 quid, 350 quid. Does that sound about right to our solicitor for drawing that up? So, do it.
Well worth it, absolutely. Do you think the narrative around what we need to achieve by certain age milestones is changing at the moment? We've got more access to travel, more access to work away, we're living longer.
I think it's changed. I think that's it, it's changed. And I don't know what point it changed. I mean, if you read the books, they'll say 1971. But no, I think it's completely changed. Young people nowadays, the future that they face is so totally, totally different, the financial future, to what their parents and their grandparents did, that actually a lot of the advice that we get is from people who were my age and older. I don't know that a lot of us get it. I mean, hopefully I do, but I do think that, that advice for, like I told you, that linear path to, retirement, as it were, it probably doesn't exist anymore. And, you're not going to have really the job for life. You're not going to have that final salary pension. You might go to university, but you're going to be loaded with a heck of a lot of student debt. So the future is very different. But that doesn't mean it's bad. Like, it looks bad. The picture looks bad. And at the minute, I'm make no bones about it. I'm not diminishing the fact that, if you leave university with 50 to 100,000 pounds worth of debt, pay 9 times your annual earnings to buy a property, etc. Right? Things are expensive. The environment is difficult. But you are also having more opportunity than ever. When I was growing up, my future looked mapped out. Go to university, get a proper job, not PR in those days, maybe like an accountant or something. That was a proper, or lawyer. Get married, have children, do that job, retire. I think about that life now and I think, it brings me out in hives. My life is nothing like that. I don't know if you gathered, I don't have kids. There's a part of me that thinks, would I have liked kids? But then there's another part of me that thinks, last year I travelled to LA, to San Francisco, to Toronto, to Barcelona, to Zurich, to Amsterdam, to Vienna. I mean, plenty of other places for work, for travel, for life. I get to be on TV, on radio, host podcasts, come on your podcast. The life that I can lead now is like nothing like my mum could ever have dreamed of. And I don't take that for granted. So again, while your life may not look like this, quote unquote, picture perfect linear path to getting a job, getting engaged, getting married, blah, 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 that may not be the ideal anyway. And I just, the permission, particularly for young women to say, you don't have to have children, blows my mind. Like, oh my God, options. And that's the thing, as much as I don't like the idea of financial influencers telling you how much they earn every month, etc., there are people that are using this new medium that didn't exist, when I was at school, to create fortunes that will set them up for life. And that's also amazing. The tools at your disposal to create something that you want to create are abundant now, and not the price to entry is not that high. So I wouldn't feel too despondent about a changing world. I think there's a lot to shake out, a lot to figure out. But I think, the opportunities, I think, when did they first have women allowed to have credit cards, allowed their own home? Certainly in my mum's lifetime. And now what we can do, don't get me wrong, that is the absolute bare minimum. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Things have changed so much, and they are going to change so much in the near future. AI is a game changer at the moment. I don't know what the next 5 years will look like, let alone 10, 15 years. But as much as you have the fear around job losses, there are also jobs that we can't even imagine, lifestyles that we can't imagine. So if you are in that situation, the best way to make the most out of anything in life is to have a really, as much as you can, positive attitude to it. Embrace it, try new things, have a portfolio career, etc. Bit like what you're doing.
Yeah, it might unfortunately be time to move away from the positivity, because you did recently buy your first home.
I did.
And yeah, tell me about your beef with the lifetime ISA.
Yeah, the lifetime ISA. It's not just my beef. Everybody doesn't like it now, which is why they're consulting about it again. So, lifetime ISA, great product if you are under the age of 40, over the age of 18, and you're wanting to buy your first home. I would even say the reason I mentioned that sort of boundary of age is because that's when you can actually open one. But the reason I have a beef with it is because I think that first-time buyer ages are getting older. There is a penalty that if you use it for anything else other than retirement, and I won't go into the fact that, the way that you save for retirement is totally different. For a long-term saving, you want to be looking at investing, and shorter term for a house. But be that as it may, that's, I think, why they want to think about changing the lifetime ISA, because it's very confusing. But the big thing for me was the penalty. So if you take it out for anything else than retirement or buying a property, you'll be hit with a penalty. 5%, but it ends up being more than that because they claw back your bonus as well, which is fine. But what I didn't like is if you also use it to buy a property that's over the limit, which I think is 450,000, right? Now, because I was 41, I had, unfortunately for me, met someone, unfortunately for me, with a couple of kids. And I think it's not just, stepchildren and blended families and all that sort of thing nowadays. With the first-time buyer age getting older, you will be in a different stage of life and looking for different things. And yes, look, if I was in Skipton, £450,000 would have been fine. But unfortunately, I wasn't. My other half's kids were based, down south, and we had to buy a property together. We decided to buy a property together down south. So I was over the limit. Now, my issue is I was buying a house. I was using it for what it was intended for, and I had saved quite a lot of money in it. But I had to pay the government about £4,000 in penalty because I was buying a property that was more expensive than what they said. Now, look, I get it. I get the idea that they didn't want this to be used by people who were wealthy. All right, that's fair enough. But you also have a problem with the fact that that amount, that 450 threshold, hasn't gone up since they introduced it in 2017. And I believe if it had, it would be around 560,000, I think. That would have been the threshold for buying property. But also, we've spoken about London and the southeast. It doesn't take account of the different house prices around the country. So, like I said, if I'd have stayed in Yorkshire, if we'd have bought together in the northeast where he's from, fine. But we didn't. And I feel like I gave the government £4,000 for doing the right thing, for saving. I mean, I didn't keep the bonus. They took that back as well. So it's not like I got anything from the taxpayer. Thankfully, I decided to invest it, which I wouldn't normally say. But because I opened it in 2017 and wasn't sure when I would buy, and actually ended up buying in, 7 years later, that actually it worked out, a good idea for me, and that paid for the penalty just. But for short term, if you're just putting it in cash, that wouldn't have covered that. And that to me is really frustrating. And I assume that's why it's frustrating and why we are now having a consultation. And I mean, I don't know what you think about all of these sort of policies to get people to buy property. A lot of tinkering around the edges. And, it's something we've discussed a lot on our podcast is, should we just leave the housing market a bit to its own devices? But then young people would say, well, cut us some slack. We need some help getting on the property ladder. But if you keep doing incentives to pump up prices, keep prices high, well, are you really getting a benefit there?
Yeah, and when the lifetime ISA became an option around about 8 years ago now, we were encouraged put money into a lifetime ISA, save over the long term until you're ready to buy a house. But a £400,000 house 8 years ago could be a £475,000 house now,
Absolutely.
and therefore you can't buy it. And that's a major problem. There's frustration there, and people always ask me, do you think they're going to change the lifetime ISA? My answer is yes, they definitely will.
Yep.
However, when? Absolutely no idea. They're not doing it today. They're not doing it tomorrow. And the problem with that is that's not good enough for people who want to utilise it,
Yeah.
but they don't know if it's going to be suitable because they don't know what changes are to come or if there are going to be changes.
Well, the problem as well is if banks don't think it's going to be a long-term solution, are they going to be offering that many? So, that's where you need to look around. But it's for some people, it's just a no-brainer. You get, if you can put in £4,000, you can get a top up of £1,000. Is that right?
You can put £4,000 in annually
That's it.
and then get the £1,000 top up. Yes.
Just yep. So if you can put in £4,000 up to, obviously, you get that bonus of £1,000. And obviously, if your other half hasn't bought a property, they can do the same. Obviously, you don't have to buy with another person. However, if you are, and then that's £2,000 that you wouldn't have had anyway. So, look, while it's still there and there are still financial institutions offering it, it's an idea. But I'm just peeved that I had to pay thousands of pounds for doing the right thing and buying a house.
Rightly so, may I add. Okay, what money habit has most improved your life?
Engagement.
Go on.
I am not the best person I like school. I was all right at school, but I just think if I want to learn about something, I don't want to be sitting there reading a textbook or anything. The best way that I've learned about money, so every good habit that I've got now, has come probably from inspiration from other people telling me what they do. So I listen to podcasts. They're financial influencers that I really like. I was watching The Big Short again last night. Things like that. Books. There's some brilliantly engaging financial books. Or just books, things like Thinking Fast and Slow, talking about, behavioral economics and the way that we think and behavioral psychology, all play into your developing a great mindset with developing good habits about money. So engagement for me, listening, reading, watching, talking to people. And that's another key thing. The more I get involved with money, and not just as a financial journalist and a broadcaster, but, I practice what I preach here. I'm listening to the podcast that I'm telling people to listen to as well. The more that I have the more I talk with people, friends, family, the more I'm learning, the more I'm, getting ideas. So yeah, if I had one tip to have better habits, it would be engagement.
Great answer. What gives you hope for the future of housing in the UK?
That is a big question. I don't think the housing situation is absolutely dire. What gives me hope is young people's attitudes. I think that when we start to realise that buying a property, an English man or woman's home is his castle, once we sort of ditch that idea and develop a rental system that is sustainable, fair, and reasonable for people, because I don't think by and large we've got that at the moment, I think that will enable people to live completely different lives. I think we're like a few steps behind where young people want us to be right now in this country. So I think we'll get there, but it will take some time.
And final question of the podcast. As somebody who spent a lot of time moving around, is about to make a big move to Canada, what does home mean to you?
Great question. I must have lived in over 20 places, so home is not a building. It's funny, when I first bought my property, I thought, this will feel like home. I can now paint the walls. Oh my God, I can put up pictures. Wow. But it felt no different. I can stay in an Airbnb, as I am at the moment, in between moving to Canada, and I call it home. Home is having the security of everyone around me. I'm a very family orientated person. My dad even said, I think you might struggle going to Canada because you're such a homebody. And it's true, homebody being a family person. My family is everything to me. And because they've stayed in, like my mum's got her same property that she had when we moved over from Norway. So if I think about home, I think about my family.
Great answer. Georgie, thank you very much for appearing on the Let's Buy a Home podcast. Where can our listeners find out more about you and your content?
Excellent. Well, I'm Georgie Frost Money on social media. I've recently joined TikTok. I feel a bit old for that, but I'm doing my best. Okay, taking inspiration from you. Also, This Is Money podcast and Investing Unlocked podcast, and then wherever I may appear, BBC, those sorts of places. But yeah, I am quite engaged in social. So message me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Not
Amazing.
necessarily about how I did today, because I don't know about that, but just generally, any questions. Honestly, it's one of the most privileged things as a financial journalist and as someone sort of out there a bit more. When people come up to me, and it happens more often now, and say, "Oh, I listen to your podcast because it's great." It's amazing. Honestly, that is so lovely. So yeah, if just say hi.
Perfect. Well, amazing. Fantastic episode. I was so excited to have you on. And thank you very much to our listeners. We'll be back next week with another episode.